Hello, VC and friends and everybody else. I'm back. I gave you a day off. I didn't record a video yesterday. Spent the day yesterday taking some, not just yesterday, actually for the last week or so, week and a half. I had done a video on ECM recordings that were on vinyl that never got reissued in the CD era or digital era, and pulling out some of those vinyls that I haven't literally played some of them in over 30 years made me want to hear them again. Now, I moved here a little bit over 2 years ago, and I've had my turntable hooked up pretty much since day one, but I haven't played any records until recently. And kind of discouraging because there is, when I finally, last week, pulled out my vinyl to play some, I'm hearing a distinct scraping sound inside the turntable. And the thing is, it was like, I don't know, it's an Audio-Technica turntable. I've barely used it. When my old turntable died, I want to say 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, I decided, well, I'm only going to buy one more turntable because I don't really listen to albums that much. I pretty much listen to them only to transfer them into my computer. And those are only the ones that I can't get on CD. So there's been entire years in the 8 or so years that I've had this turntable that I haven't used it at all. I pretty much slap on some vinyl, copy it into my computer. If it skips, I might have to copy it a second time, that kind of thing. But I was very discouraged because it's the first time I've attempted to use this since I moved. So I'm wondering if during my move I dislodged something or something's rubbing up against something internally. I was still able to play the vinyl, still able to copy it into my computer. I'm a little concerned though, and anywhere, I guess. I was going to say in northern New Jersey, it's very hard to find anybody that does turntable repairs anymore, but I think it's impossible to find turntable repairs anywhere. I'm not going to toss it, and I don't have the money to buy another one, especially considering I probably spent $300 or $400 on this one because I wanted to get a good last turntable and never have to buy another one. So any of you out there know any place where I can get it fixed in northern New Jersey area, let me know. I'm doing a short video today. You say. He always says that. But I had a few ideas for videos. I was going to do another Icon album video, and I was going to do the Bar Phillips Journal Violone 2 album, and Carm did it. He said it all. Between that and the fact that I also showed that particular album on my last video, describing how I got into the whole ECM thing and jazz and all that stuff, and that album was a big part of it. So why would I go, I'm not going to go there right now again. Not that it won't crop up at some future time. And I don't actually have another one prepared. I want to pretty much stick to some iconic things in terms of how they affected me, and not just albums that I happen to love. There's a big difference there, I think. There's some albums I love, but they may not have had the effect on me, or I was already very familiar with the genre or the artist or whatever. So I was going to do a thing of my top 5 favorite Keith Jarrett albums. Keith Jarrett probably doesn't need me to promote him. And I've got tons and tons and tons of Keith Jarrett albums and CDs. But knowing, what my top 5 were, I wanted to pull out the vinyl only because they show up better on camera than the tiny CD booklets. And I couldn't find at least 2 of the 5 of the Keith Jarrett vinyl that I know I have. So I was going to do Don Cherry, and again, I can't find the ones. Don Cherry's an interesting story too, so stick around, guys. When I find that, I'll do that. But today I decided to do something. The reason that this is going to be short is because I'm not an expert on this guy. And this is more of an appreciation and something different than the stuff I've done before. It's jazz. But it's a guy that, some of you folks may not have heard of, his club is probably better known than he is. It's Howard Rumsey. And Howard Rumsey was or is a bass player. Actually, he retired. He's a bass player. He was born in 1917, and from what I can see on the internet, he's still alive. California guy. Was looking for a gig, I guess, when he came out of the service in around 1948 or 49. came across this restaurant in Hermosa Beach, California, a place that God knows I would love to go to, but and any of you want to buy me a ticket out there, feel free. But there's this restaurant, anyway, I digress, in Hermosa Beach, California, called the Lighthouse. And this is a drawing that is, I guess, I've seen pictures of it somewhere or other. Fairly accurate, you know, cartoonish style 1950s drawing, which I love the art from that period anyway, of what the club looks like. And this is I guess this is like the original album cover. I love the OJC, the original Jazz Classics thing. Anyway, this guy, I'm doing a terrible job here. This guy, Howard Rumsey, was looking for a gig as a bass player, upright bassist, of course. Around 1949, he comes across the Lighthouse, this restaurant, talks to the owner about having a jazz band there. Apparently, it's a fairly large room. And club owner said, restaurant owner said, hey, that's a good idea. And the Lighthouse became better known as a jazz club than anything else and as a restaurant. And it stayed that way for many years. Looking it up online, it's still there, and it's still a music club, but it looks like it might be a punk club now or something like that, which kind of figures, I've always had a love of the 50s and early 60s style pop art and stuff like that. And I discovered these guys, Howard Rumsey, and they came to be known as the Lighthouse All-Stars in the LA area, that is. Where a lot of jazz musicians not only happened to be, but also moved to in order to take part in the burgeoning studio scene at the time. As kind of rock and roll started taking over a lot of the popularity of jazz, a lot of these jazz artists that just played clubs for a living went to the West Coast because they were good musicians. They could read music and everything, And they could go into the studios, do studio gigs, jobs, and make a decent living and not really, be at home at night kind of thing, not have to do the road traveling and all that kind of thing. And so a lot of them went on to do movie soundtracks, television soundtracks, and if you listen closely to a lot of TV soundtracks of the 50s and 60s, what you hear when you hear orchestrated kind of music with a lot of horns, jazzy stuff, is you probably hear the guys that actually were playing at this club. A lot of them you'll see if you read liner notes on albums by West Coast guys, even in the 1970s, you'll see some of the names of these guys, playing the written parts. And there's a lot of named guys here, and this became like the place to hang out. I'm gonna read this. The liner notes are very short, fairly. It says, "This album is the first of a series of releases that are aimed to satisfy the many requests we have had for some Sunday jazz a la Lighthouse. It was almost 4 years ago that John Levine decided to present jazz in concert form, that is, for listening only, in his Southern California seashore club, the Lighthouse. Hermosa Beach is the ideal locale for such a year-round presentation because, although it is remote enough to be going somewhere, it is situated in a fast-growing South Bay area so that more people live closer to it every year." Mind you, this was written in 1953, so the reference was to 1949 when he says it was almost 4 years ago that the club was open for jazz. Sunday jazz was a feature from the very inception of our concert policy, and the popularity of the afternoon and evening concerts led into what is now our most popular feature of the week, a continuous concert from 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. every Sunday throughout the year. So imagine that. Nowadays, people, and even I am guilty, wouldn't go out on a Sunday night, certainly, And imagine that that there's this concert starting at 2 p.m. every Sunday. This is every week for years. A jazz concert that started 2 p.m. on a Sunday and was popular enough to not only have it every week, but to go all the way until 2 a.m. Monday morning when all these folks that are watching this have to go to work. I find that incredible. And I get incredibly nostalgic because, in a way, I wish I was there, during those times, or I wish they were still like that, like this club were still there to this day, with this policy and, with this kind of music. Now, of course, all this doesn't tell you anything about the music, but this is very mainstream, very conservative, bebop-oriented jazz. There's nothing experimental here. It always strikes me as the kind of jazz that you would have heard on the radio if there was a radio program, playing the popular jazz. That all this stuff would have fit on there. The song lengths rarely go over 6 minutes, and many of them are much shorter than that. And it's a fairly big band. There's a lot of arranged stuff. There's, a small horn section. But if you read and are familiar with album credits, a lot of names here will pop up that you'll know from various being studio musician type of things. Even playing on rock records, probably, like a Steely Dan kind of thing, because they employed a lot of musicians, from the jazz world that were playing written parts, Jimmy Guthrie is on here. Now he's known as a leader in his own right. So let me see. Maynard Ferguson, Hampton Hawes, the pianist, Shelly Manne, the drums of Shelly's Manhole, the great club in Los Angeles. Jazz club was there for many years. And none of these guys are unknown. Shorty Rogers plays on here. Who else? There's some guys. Bob Cooper, who may or may not be known depending on how much you read. Again, album credits. Jimmy Guthrie again. Oh man, Frank Patchen piano. Somebody I'm not familiar with. Bob Cooper, I already said. Hampton Hawes. A lot of people here. Shelly Manne, Jimmy Guthrie, blah blah blah. I said these all already. There's a fairly small group on this one. This album was recorded in 1953. And I love that cover. This is one of those album covers that I would hang up on my wall because I love the art. So it's very conservative kind of jazz, very polite. I hate to use that term in a way, kind of jazz, but nobody's honking their horns or doing any free jazz stuff. But it's very accessible, very accessible. And this was actually commercial music at one time. It was almost like the smooth jazz of its age. Here's another album of theirs on the, reissued on the OJC album called Oboe Flute, and that's because, and this is a fairly unusual combination, is they hit on this idea of having within their jazz band both a flute player and an oboe player, which aren't all that common in jazz, and so they recorded some tunes around that theme. And this is typical of a few albums I have, and I couldn't dig out all my vinyl of theirs. I couldn't find them all. Fairly typical of quite a few of their albums that I have, and that is they're made up of more than one session. So it seems like some of these sessions came out on EPs or 10-inch LPs, which 10-inch LP is a little strange configuration to me. I haven't seen a lot of those. I've seen 10-inch EPs, but there's about 12 tracks on here. 8 of them were released probably in early 1954 because they were recorded sometime, early 54. 8 tracks on the album were, and there's 4 tracks that were recorded in 56. So it's a little of an odd conglomeration, this album, and so this was probably the way it was issued initially, but 8 of the tracks came out in 54, the same year they were recorded, it looks like, as a 10-inch EP, which probably had a different cover. And then they threw in an additional 4 tracks when they issued this album that were recorded in 1956. So quite a few of their releases jump years like that and have material from a couple different sources. So, and not too many of these. There are some that are live recordings from the actual club themselves, but a lot of these are actually recordings made in the studios. Who's on here? Besides Howard Rumsey, the bass player, who's on all of their albums. Bob Cooper, I mentioned. He was on the last one as well. Fairly well known. Bud Shank is on this. Bud Shank, another guy, well known, especially in the LA, jazz scene. I mean, he's had no shortage of solo albums and career in himself. Howard Rumsey, and then a little bit of a surprise, Max Roach plays drums on here. Max Roach wasn't a part of the house band necessarily, so to speak. He's an East Coast guy. But they certainly welcomed the East Coast folks in and had them come down and play concerts. And I believe Max Roach actually stayed for maybe a month or so. So they got some of the East Coast guys down there too in the band. And when you look at these guys, Buddy Collette is another guy that I think he probably became a session musician, but also had a solo deal on his, had some solo albums out on his own, a multiple horn player. Wonderful guy. And this is very, very accessible stuff, very easy to listen to in your car kind of music. And I love these covers. This is a very, 1950s and early 60s style cover. Now, this Lighthouse has nothing to do with... That's Howard Rumsey there. Lighthouse has nothing to do with the actual club. That's just a lighthouse. That's not the club, obviously. This album is a little unusual because it appears that this entire album was recorded in one session. So this was one that wasn't gobbled together from a couple different years, different sessions. This is from October 56. So it was even before I was born. This is more of I guess an album in terms of this stuff didn't first come out in an EP and then they cobbled together an album from there. I'm trying to take a quick look. Bob Cooper's on here again. Frank Rosalino, definitely a studio musician. I remember, I think it was Lee Ritenour wrote a little bit about him or had him on a number of his early solo albums. He was, a lot of these guys, like I said, went into the studio world and television soundtracks, movie soundtracks. Canty Condoli, trumpet player, again, I believe another guy that went into the studios, fairly well known. Stan Levy on drums, Sonny Clark on piano, and of course Howard Rumsey on bass. Now Rumsey, there was one years, I want to say in the late 80s I saw, definitely in the CD era, there was a reunion of Howard Rumsey's Lighthouse All-Stars, and they made like kind of a reunion album. And even though Howard Rumsey was obviously alive at that point, he didn't play bass on it. So I don't know if he retired essentially from playing music, but it was an album where some of these guys that had, that were part of the regular ongoing band actually got back together, and I'm guessing it was probably like the guys like Bob Cooper and Buddy Collette, I think, were on that. And here, found a couple CDs. I forgot I even had this one. Another one, very similar cover to the last one. In the Solo Spotlight. What is this from? This is from, again, another one that's cobbled together from a couple different sessions, 1954 and 1957. So I guess these were things that probably went out on EPs or the 10-inch LP kind of things. And they later, I guess, went out of print, and then they cobbled them together to make a, like a 40-minute album or so. And again, who's on here? Frank Rosalino, Conte Candoli, Pepper Adams on baritone sax, ladies and gentlemen. Bob Cooper, tenor sax. Bud Shank is on here. Dick Shreve, piano. Howard Rumsey on bass, and Stan Levy on drums. Stan Levy, it seems, was a guy that was around, I guess, for quite a few years as their main drummer. And that's a good one. I don't know in terms of... like I said, sessions from 54 and 57, so I think this came out probably originally in 57. It's good to see something that actually came out before I was born. They have two iterations, and it wasn't, like I said with the Max Roach thing. Here we go. It's Miles Davis. Yeah, Miles, in 1953, September 13th, actually made it to the Lighthouse. Not with his own band. He had the Howard Rumsey's band backing him up. So you had Howard Rumsey on bass, Lorraine Geller on piano, somebody I'm not familiar with. Bob Cooper was there. Bob Shank was there. Miles on trumpet, and guess who on drums? Max Roach. I guess this is during that period that Max was hanging out in Hermosa Beach Lighthouse for a while and became their house drummer for a short time. And what I originally bought this edition of it. I remember when this came out on LP, which I didn't get. Years later, I'm looking at Chet Baker, and I find that they also released these are Lighthouse sessions of Chet Baker doing the same thing. Chet Baker, who was, more of a West Coast guy anyway, playing at the Lighthouse. But the interesting thing is that even though I don't recall it making a mention on the previous disc, Chet was there the same day that Miles Davis was there. So this came out in two different versions. There's a version of just the Miles tracks that Miles played on, and then they call it the complete, but it's not quite complete, edition with Chet Baker and Miles Davis tracks. They didn't play together, but they played both on the same day back in 1953, and both backed by the Lighthouse All-Stars. There's only one track on here that's left off that's on the Miles thing, and it even makes mention of it on the disc. So it has all of the Chet Baker tracks, all of the Miles Davis tracks. The only thing missing is like a 4-minute piece that is a Max Roach drum solo, which for me, being a Max Roach fan, I would buy that. I would repurchase this disc just to get that drum solo, even if I had this one already. So this is good for me. This is way under a half hour. That's my appreciation of a group and a musician, Howard Rumsey and his Lighthouse All-Stars, that I don't know a great deal about. But they were interesting. They came into, I came to them at a time in my life when I was down and troubled, and it seemed like to be in the early 50s, when life was simpler and all that, stuff that, people think that probably isn't true. But the music stayed with me enough so that, years later when I got into CDs, I still, went and I was seeking out some of the Lighthouse stuff, very, it works as background music if you have people that don't like jazz, but you don't want to placate them by playing the stuff they actually like. Play it in your car, good music for that. And I'm probably going to, when I can, get back into collecting as much of the Howard Rumsey and the 1950s Lighthouse All-Stars as I can. And I don't know. I think with Howard Rumsey pushing 100 years, I don't think we're likely to see him record again if he's still alive. But sure, it'd be nice to get a biography on him, or a biography on the whole Lighthouse scene that happened during those years, with all the the people in and out, the famous people and the not so famous people. I can imagine, there was probably a lot of stories that happened during the many years that they had jazz there. Okay, guys, I'm going to call it a day, and I'm going to search my mind for a theme for the next one. And at way under a half hour, this is almost for me like a short commercial break. So guys, I hope you like it. I hope there was some value to this video for you, and thanks for all your comments and for watching, and you're a great bunch of folks, and I appreciate it. Have a good week. I'll be back soon. Bye.